What happens when Britain's most thoughtful interviewer meets one of the world's most divisive public figures? It began as a calm, introspective conversation about truth, but within minutes, it turned into a psychological duel. By the end, even James O'Brien, the man known for his patience and empathy, had reached his breaking point. The studio lights at full disclosure cast a warm amber glow over the minimalist set. There was no live audience, no applause, no makeup artist rushing across the frame. Just 2 chairs, 2 microphones, and the soundproof hush of a London recording studio. James O'Brien leaned forward in his seat, his tone calm, his eyes focused, but kind. Across from him sat Meghan Markle, perfectly poised in a cream blouse and navy blazer, her posture upright, her expression unreadable. The faintest hint of a polite smile lingered on her lips, though her eyes seemed to measure every word before it was even spoken. "Meghan," James began, his voice even. "You've spoken so often about authenticity, about wanting to live life on your own terms. That's the essence of this show, really. So tell me, what does authenticity mean to you now?" Meghan inhaled softly, her voice smooth but cool. "Authenticity means truth, James," she said. "Something that's been missing from how people have chosen to perceive me. It means refusing to let others define who you are, even when they insist on misunderstanding you." James nodded. "And do you think you've been misunderstood?" She let out a delicate laugh, the kind that carried more irritation than humor. "I think the question isn't whether I've been misunderstood," she replied, tilting her head slightly, "but whether people ever wanted to understand me at all." There was a long pause. James, experienced in the rhythms of difficult conversations, recognized the tone immediately. Defensive, rehearsed, but edged with wounded pride. He smiled faintly. "That's an interesting way of putting it. But do you think maybe that constant need to correct people, to clarify who you are, might be keeping the conversation about you rather than about the causes you support?" Meghan blinked, her jaw tightening just slightly. "I'm sorry. Is there a rule against speaking for oneself now? Should I be quiet to make everyone else feel comfortable?" James chuckles softly, raising his hands. "Not at all, it's just a question. Some people see your advocacy as powerful. Others see it as personal brand management." Her expression cooled instantly. "That's such a convenient label, isn't it? When a woman speaks about her experience, it's called branding. When a man does it, it's called bravery." James nodded slowly but didn't back down. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just about tone and repetition. The story has been told many times. Interviews, documentaries, podcasts, some would say you're still fighting. Battles from years ago." Meghan's smile returned. But this one didn't reach her eyes. "You mean the battles the press won't let go of, or the ones people like you can't stop bringing up?" The air in the room thickened. James kept his tone level, almost soothing. "Fair point, but this isn't the press. This is just a conversation." "A conversation," she repeated, her voice tightening. "That's an interesting word for it, because so far it feels like a cross-examination." He leaned back slightly, clasping his hands together. "I assure you, Meghan, that's not the intent. I ask questions, it's what I do." "Yes," she replied sharply. "And you make judgments. That's what you do, too." For a brief moment, silence filled the studio. The kind of silence that feels heavier than words. The producer behind the glass shifted in her chair. Meghan adjusted her blazer, crossed her legs again, and smiled with studied calm. James decided to shift direction. "Let's talk about America. You've often described it as a fresh start. What's different about life there for you and Harry?" Meghan exhaled, relaxing slightly. "Everything. There's freedom, creativity, and respect for individuality. People don't look at you and see a title. They see a human being. I can finally be myself without judgment." James hesitated. "That's interesting, because many would say that American media has been just as relentless, maybe even more so." Meghan raised her chin. "At least in America, I can control the narrative. I decide when I speak. That's what freedom looks like." James nodded, his tone thoughtful. "But doesn't that contradict the idea of stepping away from the spotlight?" Meghan's smile froze. "Contradict? No, it clarifies it. There's a difference between seeking privacy and reclaiming control. Perhaps the media should learn that nuance before criticizing me for breathing." James' eyes softened, but his mind was already racing. He'd interviewed politicians, celebrities, even war veterans. And he knew this rhythm, the polished confidence, the wounded pride, the subtle condescension. The room was calm, but beneath the calm, something electric was building. He sipped his tea and leaned forward again, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly. "Meghan," he said quietly, "I'm just trying to understand whether you want to be heard or adored." Her eyes flicked up instantly. "I think that question says more about you than it does about me," she said coldly. The producer behind the glass froze, and for the first time in the interview, James O'Brien felt the temperature in the room drop. The air in the full disclosure studio felt heavier now, not tense enough to break, but thick with the weight of two sharp minds circling each other like fencers in slow motion. James O'Brien shifted slightly in his chair, his tone still calm, but his eyes had sharpened. "You mentioned control," he said, his voice low, deliberate. "That you finally have control over your story. But when someone constantly insists they're misunderstood, at what point does control become obsession?" Meghan's eyebrows lifted just a fraction. "Obsession," she repeated, smiling thinly. "That's a rather loaded word, don't you think?" James gave a small shrug. "Perhaps, but I ask because you've had the chance to tell your story on television, in books, in podcasts again and again. If people still don't understand, maybe it's not them who are refusing to listen." Meghan leaned back, her smile never faltering. "You mean maybe it's me?" "I mean," James replied evenly, "that maybe the message is being buried under the performance. That did it." A flash of irritation crossed her face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "Performance," she said sharply. "James, with respect, that's a very cynical way to view someone sharing their truth. If a man gets emotional on air, he's praised for his honesty. When I do it, it's a performance. Do you see the double standard here?" "I see an interesting pattern," he said softly. "When you're challenged, you don't answer, you reframe. You turn every question into a moral statement. You call it defending yourself, but it often feels like deflecting." Her smile vanished. "You sound like the British tabloids," she snapped. "Do you work for them too, or is this just your hobby?" There was a short silence. Then James chuckled quietly. "You know, I actually admire that line. But no, Meghan, my job isn't to attack, it's to understand. And to understand, I have to ask what others won't." "Maybe," she said, crossing her arms, "you should ask yourself why they won't." James' tone remained steady, almost clinical. "Because they're afraid of being called something they're not. Sexist, racist, misogynistic. The moment someone challenges you, the labels come out. That's power, Meghan. And I wonder, do you ever feel tempted to use it?" Meghan stared at him, her expression icy now. "What you're implying is insulting." "I'm not implying," James said calmly. "I'm asking." She gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "You're very good at disguising criticism as curiosity." "Maybe," he said with a faint smile. "You're very good at disguising anger as grace." That landed. Meghan blinked, momentarily stunned. The control she had so carefully maintained flickered. For just a second, her jaw tightened, her breathing shallow. But then, just as quickly, she recovered. "I'm not angry," she said coldly. "I'm just tired. Tired of men who think they can psychoanalyze me mid-inter to make themselves look clever." James tilted his head unbothered. "That's fair, but maybe this isn't about men at all. Maybe it's about accountability. Do you ever feel that, Meghan? Accountability? Or does being misunderstood exempt you from it?" Her tone rose slightly. "I've spent years being accountable to the world, to a family that wanted me silent, to a press that wanted me broken. Forgive me if I don't feel the need to prove myself to yet another man with a microphone." James' expression softened, but his voice didn't. "It's not about proving yourself. It's about being consistent. You say you wanted peace, but you've chosen platforms. You say you wanted privacy, but you've given interviews. You say you don't want pity, but everything you say demands sympathy. Isn't that a contradiction worth exploring?" Meghan's voice dropped, quieter now but sharper. "You really think it's that simple? That life can be boiled down to the sound bites you repeat on this show?" "Not at all," James said evenly. "But contradictions reveal character, and that's what this show is about." For a moment, the silence returned, longer this time. Meghan's hands folded in her lap. She was still, but her eyes were alive with tension. The control, the poise, the careful restraint. All of it was starting to show its cracks. She finally spoke, her words cutting and deliberate. "I came here thinking this would be a real conversation, one based on empathy and understanding. But this feels like yet another man trying to prove a woman wrong for daring to have a voice." James leaned back, sighing softly. "You're mistaking challenge for disrespect." "Am I?" "Yes," he said gently. "Because this isn't about silencing you, Meghan. It's about seeing whether you believe your own narrative." Meghan let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "My own narrative? I am the narrative, James. Whether I speak or stay silent, people twist my life into whatever story fits their bias. I'm not the writer. I'm the ink everyone else spills." James regarded her quietly for a moment, the empathy back in his expression, but tinged now with something closer to concern. And yet, he said softly, you still choose to hold the pen. That line hung in the air. Meghan didn't respond immediately. She blinked twice, then smiled, a smile that was all surface, no warmth. You really think that's profound, don't you? She said finally. But it's just another attempt to box me in like everyone else does. James smiled faintly. Then maybe the box isn't the problem, Meghan. Maybe it's what happens when someone finally holds up a mirror. Her jaw clenched. You're not a mirror, James. You're a microphone, and you're using it like a weapon. And just like that, the friendly atmosphere was gone. The temperature in the room had dropped again, not because of anger, but because something deeper had taken hold. It wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a duel for nearly 40 minutes. The conversation between Meghan Markle and James O'Brien had danced between civility and combat. Each time James tried to redirect the discussion toward empathy, Meghan found a way to turn it into an accusation. And though James was a master of restraint, the cracks were showing in his voice, subtle but unmistakable. He leaned forward, his elbows resting lightly on the table. Let's talk about the monarchy for a moment, he said evenly. You've spoken about the emotional toll it took, the sense of isolation, the lack of control. Do you ever reflect on how those statements might have affected the institution itself, your family? Meghan tilted her head slightly, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. Oh, you mean their feelings? It's fascinating how the people who silenced me suddenly became the victims in everyone's narrative. James gave a patient smile. But you understand, don't you, that people still care about the monarchy, not necessarily as an institution of power, but as part of their identity. Some feel your interviews turned private wounds into public weapons. Meghan's jaw tensed. Weapons? She echoed sharply. I was defending myself. But of course, that's not something people like you can understand, is it? The privilege of never needing to defend yourself. James didn't flinch. I defend ideas, Meghan, every day. That's my job. But defending yourself doesn't always mean burning the bridge behind you. She leaned forward, voice low, but sharp as glass. That's easy to say when you've never been on fire. James studied her carefully, calm, curious, analytical. So every criticism feels like an attack. Criticism, she said, her eyes flashing. You mean harassment, humiliation, and institutional gaslighting? Yes, James. It feels like an attack because it was won. Then why keep reliving it? He asked softly. Why keep reopening the wound on every platform, every interview, every podcast? Meghan smiled tightly. Because the wound never healed, and maybe if people actually listened instead of dissecting, it might have. James leaned back, fingers steepled, his tone measured. Listening goes both ways. You can't demand empathy and refuse reflection. Don't you ever ask yourself if the healing you want might start with forgiveness or at least closure? Her voice dropped an octave colder now. Closure requires honesty, and honesty is something I rarely received, especially from men with microphones. James exhaled quietly. The barb was obvious, deliberate. He glanced toward the control room. The producer was watching anxiously through the glass. He turned back to Meghan. Let me ask you something different then. How do you think your late mother-in-law, Princess Diana, would feel about the path you and Harry have taken? The question landed like thunder. Meghan's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening. I think Diana would understand better than anyone. She lived it. She suffered through it. And unlike you, she didn't sit behind a desk asking smug questions about other people's trauma. The tone in her voice sliced through the room. James blinked slowly, his patience visibly tested for the first time. That's not fair, Meghan. I'm not asking to provoke you. I'm asking because the comparison has been made many times by you, by Harry, by the public. It's a valid discussion. She scoffed. A discussion for you, maybe. For me, it's lived experience. But of course, empathy isn't profitable for your kind, is it? My kind? James repeated, his tone soft but his gaze sharp. Yes, interviewers who sit here pretending to care while trying to corner me into saying something headline-worthy. It's performative concern, and frankly, it's exhausting. James tilted his head, a faint smile forming, one not of humor but disbelief. You seem very convinced that every question is an ambush. That's because it always is, she said curtly. Then why agree to come on? Meghan blinked, momentarily thrown. James continued, his voice calm but piercing. You say you're tired of being misrepresented, yet here you are in another studio, on another show, doing the very thing you claim to hate, talking about how misunderstood you are. Why keep doing it if it only causes pain? Meghan hesitated, then forced a laugh. Because maybe I still have hope, James. Hope that one day someone like you will actually listen instead of trying to psychoanalyze me for ratings. James' patience was fraying now. You came here for conversation, Meghan. That's what I'm giving you. But conversation means exchange, not monologue. Exchange, she said sharply. You've interrupted me 5 times since we started. You don't want exchange, you want control. Just like every other man who's ever sat across from me pretending to play fair. Her words hit the air like sparks off flint. The tension in the room was almost physical now, a dense, vibrating silence. James took a breath, his composure remarkable but thinning. You keep turning every question into an accusation. You've called me smug, manipulative, performative all in the last 10 minutes. I've asked nothing that wasn't public record or your own statement, she smirked. Then maybe the record is wrong. Or maybe, James said softly, you just don't like being challenged. That line hung there like smoke. Meghan's hand twitched slightly. Challenged? She repeated, incredulous. James, I've been challenged since the day I married into that family, by the press, by the palace, by people like you who think my existence is a case study in hypocrisy. So no, I don't need a lecture on challenge. I've lived it. James nodded slowly. Then maybe that's why you mistake curiosity for confrontation. Her eyes flared, her voice rising. Don't patronize me. I'm not, he replied, his voice still calm. But you can't keep calling every question an attack. At some point, the problem stops being the interviewer and starts being the interviewee. That was the moment, the shift. Meghan leaned forward, eyes blazing, her voice trembling with anger. You have no idea what it's like to live my life. To be torn apart every single day by people who have never met me, who think they have the right to judge me. So unless you've been hunted by tabloids, betrayed by institutions, and vilified for breathing, maybe you should keep your moral lectures to yourself. James said nothing for a long moment. Then very quietly he replied, You're right, I haven't lived your life, but I also haven't turned mine into a perpetual victim narrative. The silence that followed was explosive. Even through the glass, the producer's face went pale. Meghan's voice dropped to a whisper. What did you just say? James met her gaze steadily. You heard me. You say you want empathy, but you don't offer it. You say you want truth, but you can't handle perspective. You claim to fight for others, but every story comes back to you. That's not bravery, Meghan, that's self-absorption. Her chair shifted. She straightened her posture, breathing sharply through her nose. You know what, James, she said, voice trembling between fury and disbelief. This was a mistake. James' tone was low, final. Maybe it was. For a brief moment, the studio was frozen. Only the low hum of the recording equipment broke the silence. Meghan Markle sat rigid, her arms folded tightly across her chest. James O'Brien, composed but visibly drained, adjusted his microphone and leaned back slightly. The tension between them was electric, the kind of energy that precedes a storm. He finally spoke, his voice calm but edged with fatigue. Meghan, he said quietly, you've accused me of twisting your words, attacking you, silencing you. But all I've done is ask questions. Questions any journalist would ask. Her reply came fast. Sharp, defensive questions that come from the same place as every headline I've ever had to correct. You call them curiosity. I call them provocation. James' brow furrowed slightly. Provocation? You walked into a studio called Full Disclosure. What did you expect? Compliments? Meghan let out a sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. I expected integrity. I expected empathy. But maybe I was foolish to think this show was different. You came here to tell your story, James replied evenly. And I gave you the space to do it, but instead of conversation, you've given me condescension. She snapped back. Because you've treated me like a defendant. No, he said softly. I've treated you like an adult. The silence that followed was deafening. Meghan's jaw tightened, her fingers gripping the arm of her chair. Her mask of calm had finally cracked, just slightly, but enough for everyone in the control room to feel it. James continued, his tone deliberate and professional. You've spent years describing how everyone else has failed you, the press, the monarchy, even your own family. But what I'm hearing is that everyone's to blame but you. Is that really how you see the world? Meghan glared at him. I don't owe the world my forgiveness, not after what it's done to me. And maybe, James said quietly, that's why you'll never find peace. Her lips parted, stunned. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with sudden heat, she leaned forward and hissed. How dare you? You don't get to sit there in your comfortable chair and tell me what peace looks like. You don't know me. James didn't raise his voice. You're right, I don't, but I do know what accountability sounds like, and this isn't it. Meghan stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. I don't have to take this. James stayed seated, his voice calm and steady. Then don't. Her eyes widened. What? I said don't. He repeated firmly. If you can't have a conversation without turning it into a courtroom, then maybe this interview should end here. She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You're actually cutting me off on your little podcast. James sighed, rubbing his temple. This isn't a courtroom, and it's not a little podcast. It's a platform built on dialogue, something you've turned into a monologue of grievance. I've done my best to stay respectful, but this isn't working. Meghan's tone was venomous. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? He met her eyes completely unflinching. Yes, a guest who's forgotten what a conversation is. Her face went red, her voice trembling with anger. You're proving my point. Every man in media thinks he can humiliate me for sport. No, James said, his voice firm now. What I'm proving is that civility has limits, and I think we've reached them. He turned slightly toward the production team behind the glass. We're done here, he said quietly. The producer hesitated, glancing between them. Meghan scoffed, shaking her head. Oh, so that's it. You get the last word and I'm just supposed to walk away. James looked at her with a calm sadness. You've had plenty of words, Meghan, all of them yours. The silence that followed was almost cinematic. Slowly, Meghan gathered her things, her movements controlled but tight, her face a careful mask of indignation. She stood, adjusted her blazer, and gave a small, bitter smile. You know, she said, her voice low. You'll regret this. People like you always do. James didn't blink. If standing up for fairness is something to regret, then I'll live with it. She lingered for a second, waiting for a reaction, a flinch, a look of doubt, anything. But James O'Brien just sat there, composed, almost serene. That lack of reaction seemed to wound her more than any argument could. Finally, she turned sharply and strode toward the studio door. The click of her heels echoed through the room like punctuation, marks to an argument that had gone on too long. The door shut behind her. Silence. James exhaled slowly, rubbing his palms together before speaking into the mic. His voice was quiet, reflective. Well, he said, that was illuminating. He paused, then continued, his tone calm but pointed. Conversations like these remind us that truth isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it's the mirror we'd rather not look into. He gave a faint, almost weary smile toward the camera. And on that note, this has been full disclosure. I'm James O'Brien. Good night. The red light on the camera faded to black. The interview that was meant to be insightful had turned into something else entirely. A masterclass in how patience meets provocation. By morning, clips of the exchange would be everywhere. Headlines would read, James O'Brien ends explosive interview with Meghan Markle. And once again, the conversation Meghan claimed to want would be lost in the chaos she created. But for those who watched the full exchange, one truth stood out. James hadn't humiliated her. She had simply undone herself. And there you have it, the interview that never should have happened. What started as a discussion about truth became a lesson in composure versus ego. So, what do you think? Did James handle it the right way, or did Meghan push him too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dramatic breakdown, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because more unbelievable moments like this are coming soon.